Nagma, thank you for joining for a very candid discussion with the Middle Road. This is Nishant here, and I warmly welcome you to the platform.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure being here.
First, start with the introduction. Nagma Mullah is the CEO of Edelge Foundation. She's also a member of the board of directors at the organization. Over the last 9 years, she has enabled growth and scale for organizations that Edelge Foundation supports and has fostered strategic partnerships within the philanthropic network. She has also developed and nurtured two large collaborations with diverse stakeholders that are working with some of the most vulnerable sections or communities to support education for children and economic and social empowerment of women. She began her career with Bajaj Allianz General Insurance and played an instrumental role in their foundational team. Nagma is a chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and has a Master of Commerce degree from Pune University. So it's great to have you here, Nagma. And we are going to be talking here today. I'll be chatting with Nagma on how the Edelgate Foundation is enabling social change and impact within development sector in India, specifically relating women's equality and empowerment. So their initiatives, they have a flagship initiative, Udyam Stree, which we are going to be talking about, which aims to catalyze women's growth through entrepreneurship for a more nuanced social economic equity. Now, Edelgate Foundation is a premier grant-making organization in India. Its mission is to build and expand the philanthropic ecosystem by funding small and medium-sized grassroots nonprofits, it's known as NGOs in India, committed to empowering vulnerable children, women, and communities. Before I start, I just want to show you some staggering figures, just to give you a fair bit of perspective of why this is important. Now, one, if you look at the Indian women's contribution to the GDP is only 18%, and if you compare it to the global average, which is about 37%. And to highlight the asymmetries within the system, about 48% of women population in India is women. I mean, that's a percentage of the total Indian population. But if you are looking at this, only 14% of the women are entrepreneurs. Also, to share a perspective, now Vidya Shah, Executive Director of Edelgate Foundation, she pointed out in one of her notes in one of the publications that importance of equal opportunity for women in India. Just to give you a perspective, about 432 million working age women in India out of the working age population, 80% work in informal sector, which is like very limited financial and social support. Now, according to McKinsey Global Institute, that's what she quoted, equal opportunity for women would add about 770 billion to the GDP by 2025. Now, that's just to give you a fair perspective. Now, Nagma, you have worked for such a long time with Edelgate Foundation. You have been in this sector. Do share before we come to very pointed questions and very questions which go into the sector. Do share your experiences at the Edelgate Foundation with the audience that had a transforming effect on you. More of a global question as we start first.
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I love this, the topic of this conversation. It has a deep impact on my life, and I'm very happy to share whatever I can today. So, Nishant, like you rightly said, I was a CA and born, brought up in Bombay. So, 10 years ago, when Edelgate happened to me, is when I started realizing the difference between the experiences we have as human beings. I think the biggest transformation that Edelgate brought to my life is that I understood what a bubble I was living in. I was a girl born and brought up in Mumbai, living in Bandra, and I did not know what was happening in M ward of Devnar. And the difference between how we live was stark, and I think that had a deep impact. Secondly, if we come down to the question of what I saw in the conversation that was happening around women, is like it is the most commonsensical issue. It is not I would take two steps before and say that we don't need to support women, or we don't need to craft programs of women or enable women because we feel they deserve an opportunity. It's actually simply because it makes common sense. Because 50% of the world is that gender, and to have them side by side, shoulder to shoulder, will only make this world easier to live in, and will only have positive impact. So why are we even having this conversation, or not just this conversation, many conversations about enabling, empowering, and giving it a lens of charity, which is please enable women because it's so good. No, please do it because it's common sense. So that kind of started dawning upon me that we will have to also speak about it very differently if we want to make a dent. For whatever reasons, every system that has been crafted in the world has been built by men for men. With each experience, I understood that. And they were not devious creatures wanting to exclude women. They were just there in places of power and places of structure and created it. Now, when we bring women in bit by bit, we are defeating the purpose. I think we have to go back and say common sense hai, chalo hame karna hai. Like you gave this interesting data point that 700 billion can be increased in terms of GDP. McKinsey ne aisa report nikala tha. McKinsey assessed that if female labor force participation increased, then global GDP can go up by $12 trillion in 10 years. International labor force or labor organization estimated you just reduce 25% of gender pay gap, and the increase in global GDP can be 5.8 trillion. So clearly this is business sense, common sense, and not a sense of charity and philanthropy. And that is something that I think had a deep impact as I started going out into the field and understanding the difference between what's happening and what we understand are the problems for women to make it big.
That's very true. It should not be only in economic sense. It's good, like people are trying to sort of push that in, because then at least some of the people could listen. And a lot of, for example, Iceland, a lot of Nordic countries have been ahead of the curve. They've done such a fantastic job in getting people.
Absolutely.
Now, you've been in the landscape sector for such a long period of time. You've seen the social sector. Now, over a decade, be very specific. You could talk about what has changed over a decade in the development sector in India, or maybe also globally, but very specifically concerning to women empowerment.
Yeah. So when I had 10 years ago, I think there was a conversation was building up. There was more conversation about the need to do a lot of good for women. Actually, if you take it back to even 3 decades, 4 decades ago, I'd just like to inform everyone here that the women's rights movement in India is actually one of the strongest movements in the world. There is an incredible amount of work that has happened, not over the last 10 years, but 30, 40, 50 years, where, the leading women's rights, activists such as Flavia Agnes, who became a lawyer and then enabled women to access the legal framework. So constructive, good amount of work is happening. When I saw, and if you narrow it down to 10 years ago, there was a lot of, I think after all the activism and after all the positive work that happened to bring it into main force, conversations were happening. So they were interesting conversations, but personally, I was a little disappointed by the action, because we can keep saying that we have to do work for women. We can keep throwing data points, but now what? And as an ecosystem, what are we supposed to do? What's happening now, which is very, very positive, is one is we're having, positive proof and positive data points and research like the ones that we just quoted before, which are saying that these are exactly the benefits. This is the cost benefit of, what it's going to be to include women. Second is whether it's the Generation Equality Forum that happened last month, where globally people came together and saying we will invest in women. I think now investments are being put aside specifically for women. There are multiple kinds of efforts that are being initiated to put all that knowledge and that talk into action. I think the next 10 years are going to be very critical when this action is going to start, throwing up results. So I think that is there. A lot of talk moving into the action stage now.
We talked about a lot of data points. Now, according to World Economic Forum, India ranks at a woeful 140 out of 156 countries covered. Now, in a country that has a systemic problem of gender equality for generations, how do you think the class divide is impeding women entrepreneurship in India? Since that is one of the major thrust which you are doing through Udyam Sri.
Absolutely, because it would be a fallacy to say that women just need an opportunity and they will thrive. And that is what was happening about a decade ago, where we were saying, all right, we will give women an ability to earn and she will earn. So you teach her tailoring, give her a beautician course, and life will be sorted. And that's the misconception. The fact is that her socio-economic realities are extremely crucial to what happens with her, with her empowerment or whatever we give as training. So we have to be very cognizant of that. Some of the best solutions that actually work, in real life are those which place her context there. I'll give you a quick example. There is a project we do in 24 Pargana in Bengal, in West Bengal, which is right the spot for trafficking also, where what we do basically is ensure that girls are retained in school, because the longer she's in school and then in college, the longer, the better the chance of her surviving into dignified livelihood instead of being trafficked. So the contextual understanding of what it is to be a woman in the class that she is born in the geography that she's born in, is extremely important. So that what you've said is very pertinent. And as people who fund solutions and who analyze solution, we cannot miss that very fine nuance. That's what makes India a very complex country to work in, because we are there's so much diversity. And whether it's religious diversity, economic diversity, or simply, the rich and the poor class, it is something we have to factor in our solution instead of simply saying nahi hoega.
You covered up the diversity within the Indian system, but how do you think the systemic change is going to happen? Now, I do understand you're doing great work. There are a lot of other foundations are doing the. You're working in a very multi-collaborative, setup. But how do you think that mindset? Do you think, of course, a top-down policies, and you also need a lot of bottom-up support? You think that is happening within the Indian ecosystem?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And in fact, the reason why we are multi-stakeholder, we are very collaborative, and the design of our solutions is like that, is because it's not going to be any one person, foundation, entity, or even any one government that's going to be able to make this change. The gravity of what is going on, the gravity of the issue is generational, intergenerational, and it's not an easy resolution. See, India also has some very good policies that are already in place. India has never been a place, it's actually been a very forward-thinking country in terms of legal frameworks, or even the schemes that are available, whether it's the Mudra scheme for women, or, there is just a lot of facilitation. We will have to, like in the Udyam Stri, we are looking at the multi-stakeholder interventions because of that. For example, if you're even simply saying that women must be in workforce, or women must be, in supply chains, women must be entrepreneurs, we need the corporates to have pro-women policies which enable them to participate. We need women-oriented trainings and women-oriented facilitation, easy finance available to women. We need communities to support what women are wanting to do. So it is not just the government, it's the powers that be, whether it's through corporates or through employers, it's through the ecosystem of their surrounding. And I think finally, which we typically ignore overall, is it needs a very positive family ecosystem. Which is currently something that we have to battle. We have to not miss that as we create solutions which are just, pro policy or pro, corporate integration with women's life cycles. So I think this blend is going to be extremely important.
That's a great perspective, and I'll come to one of the statistics at a later date. But I appreciate, you shared a fantastic sort of on the ground what's presently happening in India. Now, if we look at the World Economic Forum, and there's a question which is like so global. Because in 2018, globally, 3.6% of the women and 35.6% of the men in the world were enrolled in tertiary education, but only 88.2% of the girls enrolled for primary education, in comparison to 90.5% for. Now, India, the situation is far worse for women because of this total lack of, although you have right of education to free and compulsory education act, but then you don't have a very high quality education. And research has shown, as also women, when they do get married, the career comes on a back burner for many, not for everyone. And I'm very appreciative that things have changed in India. Now, if you are looking at these statistics, what do you think could be sort of the shortfalls going forward? What do you think we should be worried about? What could be the enablers which could help us in this situation where we know that primary is okay, but secondary education is so important for women to, or going higher quality upper education for them to have a very sustainable careers?
Yes. So I think there is at a design stage a lot that we need to do to be very consciously addressing what you've said. as policymakers, as funders of such initiatives, and as designers of these solutions. When we're talking about a woman, a young girl, or an adolescent, for practical purposes, we divide it into education for girls, training for girls, employment, or financial inclusion for girls. We do it like that because it's practical to service a solution. But the thing that gets lost is we have to serve the requirement of the woman. So the woman has to be placed at the center of all our solutions, which I think gets missed because we are each focusing on just one slice of it. Like I earlier mentioned, the problems that a woman faces while she crosses one hurdle at a time they're very interconnected to each other. And she may be a graduate and she may be a postgraduate, but then she may be married, for example, to a family that's not allowing her to work. Now what kind of logic would you apply that to say, there has to be what will you do there? So at an institutional level, what Edelgave did is about 5-6 years ago, we basically defined our mission around women empowerment to say women empowerment for us is economic, but along with social empowerment, where we said we have to enable a woman to make her own livelihood, but we have to ensure she understands her access to legal and justice frameworks, which means how does she protect her property? How does she access, even file an FIR if there is any kind of unwarranted incident in her life? Most of us women, even in corporate offices, are unaware of what we need to do when anything happens that is undesirable to us. Like, I don't know how many of my peers would know how to go and file an FIR because it's unpleasant for us, and we do not, we want to imagine a world where nothing unpleasant will happen to us. I think as a woman, personally, as well as for women, we have to think of comprehensive solutions that bring these multifaceted issues together and say, yes, we will empower her with ability to earn, but we have to ensure for that she has reasonable access to education, she has access to finance, she has access to structures that government has provided to free herself from violence and discrimination. So I think institutionally we have gone back to our drawing board many years ago and said we will look at women as important stakeholders and approach their solutions from multiple layers. And in that approach, we will include a lot of other experts who are good at what they do, because it's not possible for us to be good at everything, right? And that's why everything we do is collaborative. We have different kinds of experts who partner in it, and all our funding goes to very, very key projects. Having said that, all of what we do, or a government does, or any kind of facilitation does, falls flat if there is no willingness within communities, families, fathers and mothers to want their women to have a better life than they themselves had. So I would say nothing works as brilliantly as desire from downwards up. And that is something that a part of our work is dedicated to, how to get communities to understand that their daughters, sisters, mothers need to be engaging in better education and livelihoods. So the golden egg lies there, or the nucleus of our problem lies there, and all our projects are designed for that.
Okay, brilliant. I'm very happy that you brought in this topic of rights for human, women rights, specifically in terms of property. Now, that's an excellent, topic that could be a topic in itself when we are discussing. But you gave a very well grounded reality, and I think that's one of the roots is that the property rights, because that itself creates a lot of burden on women. Like that could be one of the
Absolutely.
factors. They don't go out and become entrepreneurs because they don't have any property rights.
Absolutely. No, not just property rights. How women are brought up, and I would say I'm also included. We are protected in some ways and kept away from some realities. Like, you don't worry about it, Papa will take care of it, or you don't worry about it, your brother will take care of it. So many women don't have access to their own bank account. So many women don't even know whether they are nominees in their, in the property of the family or not. And then suddenly a catastrophe happens, and she who had a husband and a secure life is left without any kind of access to any wealth that the husband has left behind for her. And these kind of things that we find, we can't speak to, because as a society, we don't want to talk about unpleasant things, or, there's a bit of shame in asking about securing yourself. it is so systemic and how many times this has happened in friends, families. This is not about the poor. This is about what we do to and as women in 2021, where we share some very important securities that we need for ourselves. So I would say that, we can go and do a lot of projects in the grassroots for the marginalized, but it's not like the non-marginalized are doing the smarter things as well.
True. I mean, this also open to manipulation. I mean, they get manipulated. Even like you said, they could have a very secure life. I've heard cases, people very well to do, but
absolutely
one of the issues. I'm very happy that this issue has come in. Now, I'll give you. We'll talk about a bit about equitable education as we go forward. But what I want to come now to one of your very in-depth study on women entrepreneurship. Now, I think this is your flagship, and I think a very good initiative, an excellent initiative taken by Edelgate Foundation. And, you came out with a report, a landscape study on women entrepreneurship, its challenges and impact on health, socioeconomic security, family well-being, outcomes of women entrepreneurship that find helpful in driving Udyam Stree initiative. Now, one of the videos I'm also playing, and you had a very good inaugural webinar on this, and I loved it. I heard some of the conversations. I must say that I did not go through the full, so I'm guilty, as charged. But do share here, to take this platform and discuss the wonderful work which you have come out with.
Thank you very much. We're very, very proud of the Udyam Stree campaign, because it really started as a humble way in which we put the spotlight on the right issues. We found in our work that a lot of times, we are doing the programming, we are funding good projects, but a lot of people don't understand what's the need for some such complex issues. Udyam Stree was really a campaign that focused on not just women, but entrepreneur within women. And also try to bust the myth. When we say entrepreneur, we think of people sitting in offices like these, and living the high life of Bombay. But a woman entrepreneur in India is largely that woman who's running her vada pav stall or the vegetable vendor, who's actually a very a business person who has bills to pay and who's managing her bottom line. And so this campaign focuses on having women entrepreneurs in mainstream commerce in India, and why it is extremely important. Here, the stakeholders that we want to engage, and we're already engaging with, we are the industry leaders, subject matter experts, NGOs who work with women, government, state government, central government, influencers in different phases, and the academia. Because again, everybody has different sources of wealth, right, of information. And through roundtables, through this landscape report that very aptly highlighted what are the issues because of which even if you train a woman or give her finance, things may not work out the way it always. For example, we did a study of women, and we realized 35% of the women were only earning 500 per month. 29% were earning only between up till 5,000 a month. Like that is a woman entrepreneur. Only 11% of the women we had interviewed were earning above 10,000. And most of the women had never heard of government schemes that government has actually made very proactive, very, very, very inclusive government schemes that are available. 10% knew of it, only 1% had accessed it. And there was no real reason. They were just, they just had they didn't even know. So there is a lot that we were able to spotlight. We also were able to spotlight some of the things we will have to do together to ensure that there is facilitation for them to enter. Like re-looking at our policies within our offices to see, are we giving a way in, are we making space for that participation? Re-looking at philanthropists and saying, are we actually making space to ensure that women get that access? That report is very good and should be accessed. It is available on our website at Edelgate. And it is one of the things we're very, very proud of.
So let me add on here. I give a lot of preference to evidence-based, reports, and I think it's one of the best things which you have done in India. It's just an eye opener. I was listening to the statistics which you talked about yesterday, and I was stunned. I just didn't know that 1% of the women are, however good you are doing, that it's a last mile connectivity fail. And that evidence has come in, and it's very good that somebody has taken this initiative, which I think should have been done a long time back, maybe a 2 decades back also it could have been done, and so that we would have much better perspective, because you need a perspective when you're doing a policy change. If you're making policies and you just don't know, it's not connecting to the right people. So now my question here is, and this is what I thought about yesterday, and do you think we can do something in which the last mile connectivity is getting a problem? We can get more actors in, so that, there are a lot of instances where the policies have been very successful because they actually went in, they explained what it is all about. I mean, there's something like a campaign like Women, okay, this is what we are doing for you. This is what, because pandemic, I think women have been much more effective, impacted. What would your thoughts be in here? Something I think we can do here as a society.
Yes, definitely. So I'll give you one more very startling data point from another report we've been participating in, which is the Migrant Resilience Collaborative report. And there last year, 9 million migrants had walked back in that, infamous, very sad migrant, right? During the first wave. 9 million migrants walked back. Only 4.5 million came back to work in the lull between the first and the second phase. And 60% of the women that had gone back did not return. Okay, which meant 60% of the women workforce, even in the informal market. And like any such opportunity, when they don't come back, their jobs are filled by someone else, right? In this case, a man. So basically, we've lost 60% of the migrant women during this time. That should shock us and should put us in real worry. That's number one. We have some programs that are run again out of Bengal, out of Rajasthan, where the entire effort is how to create opportunities for women at the grassroots. Very stark differences. I'll tell you, in Rajasthan, it is a patriarchal society. There is a way in which our NGOs have actually worked with communities and said, okay, Mahila ghar mein hi rahegi, she'll stay in her own house, but let her access cattle and make a business out of everything that has to do with cattle, because cattle is her property. Using that, creating avenues where she stepped out of the house and became her own businesswoman. We have case studies. We've been funding these things for 10 years, and there's such remarkable result that comes out. On the other hand, if I take you to Bengal, where trafficking is the area I'm talking about, trafficking is very high. Women who've been violated sexually, have been raped, have been infested with violence, have come back as, a survivors leaders group. And I've been interviewing some of them, for half an hour. And those interviews are also up on the internet, where these survivors who've undergone incredible violence have been able to come back, take soft loans, and start life afresh by having their own small stores. So, what I think is, it's not that there are no solutions in the grassroots. There are actually very many solutions. We need to want to plug this gap. There is an enabling environment with finance. There are lakhs and crores of people who are doing whatever they can to survive. And that bridging of that gap is something that we have to commit ourselves to. That's what we're trying to do with the Udyam Stree also. We've begun with creating awareness, but this tying in of good finance with hardworking people of the country is important. And our stereotypes of what an entrepreneur looks like or what a successful worker looks like have to be kept aside to be able to trust these people who are more honest than most business people that exist. So I think it's only us. We'll have to extend ourselves. This work is already happening, and imagine if they get the right finance and the right facilitation, what can happen with them.
I think in terms of women trafficking, there should be much more serious policies. It should not happen anyway. Any forced prostitution should be, rather than it being led to the private actors. I think that's where you need a government intervention, and you need strict punishment or crackdowns on this. It should not lead to that situation where, you talked about. So that's another issue which has come in for justice. And I think here India is some measure. I think there's been an improvement in the past few years. But I've wanted to also, check on, there are a lot of talks we did about stereotyping, and I think you've already answered that. And, you had, so just wanted to take it on a personal level, or, on a level to sort of understand, when you are working as a leader, you're a social leader and you're doing a lot of innovation and you're driving a lot of change. What sort of resistance you had when you're talking about stereotyping a woman? Do you think that's something?
You're speaking of me in a personal capacity?
Yeah, I'm taking both of it in a personal capacity and as a leader. When you go out into the forums, you're talking and you are trying to implement those things. What sort of resistance do you have? Do you think it's changed over a period of time? No.
So of course, like any other journey, this was hard to begin with because I was coming from a background that was not my core work, right? That was not my core strength. I'd studied finance, I'd practiced as a CA, and here I was, joining a foundation that was working with rights as well as with a lot of facilitation. So yes, there are a lot of roadblocks. Also that I was much younger than people imagine a woman leader to look like, so that was another roadblock. Also the whole way that Edelgive is functioning, if you see, it's very multi-stakeholder, very, it's not just okay, what do we believe and what do we want to do. We're like, let's four people join hands and do together. It's more not commonplace, but it's more acceptable now. But we were speaking of it 6-7 years ago, and it was not something that was very comfortable to all. So yes, it had its own journey, but my personal way of combating this is that honestly, I don't care. There's the conviction in what needed to be done was very, very high. It was extremely important to get it done, and every time something like this would happen, you just look at what we're working towards, and the enthusiasm for it comes back. And again, I think a lot of time resistance breaks down simply because you stick around and you're consistent and you're repeating the same things again and again, and people know you're not going anywhere. And I haven't gone anywhere. It's been 10 years. Our work has just intensified, and that has in itself dimmed a lot of the noise that was around, and people have joined hands as believers. So yeah, I mean, I would not say this as a social leader. I think any leader would face, women have their own nuances, we have our own battles. But yes, it is all welcome because it's all ended well for this decade. There's a lot of work left. But I think, yes, all criticism, all stereotypes did happen. They were met with just more work and more work. And I think we're in a good place now. And so am I.
So that's good. So we have that's a positive note. Now, when you're talking about Udyam Stream, do talk about the two things. You could talk about any federal policies which you like to see. You could talk about federal at the central level or at the state level. You did speak about things, but if anything which you think could help, and maybe you could also talk about a project which you, if you want to share with an audience.
I had said before, I don't think India is a country that is, staffed for good schemes or good facilitation. There have been excellent planners and they have been placed in time. But it's also us who need to ensure, one, that there is a lot of awareness about it and that people know them. Like if you take the case in point of the, and I'll take some names here. There are schemes like the Annapurna scheme. There is the Bharatiya Mahila Bank Business Loan. There's the Mudra Yojana scheme. There's the Orient Mahila Vikas Yojana scheme. You name it, and Udyogini scheme. You name it, and they're there. Mudra Yojana scheme, for example, it's a Government of India initiative. What it wants to do is basically provide business loans and supporting women that can be financially independent and self-reliant. And after the approval of a loan, they are given Mudra cards. And these Mudra cards become like credit cards, and the withdrawal limits are 10% of the loan. It's a very, very positive scheme. And in fact, the loan limit in this scheme is 10 lakhs. So it's not a small scheme for a small and medium-sized entrepreneur. It's a big relief. Similarly, the Udyogini scheme is all about how to ensure that there is self-reliance and self-development here. And here it's all about facilitating women in entrepreneurship, enabling that they're given good rates of interest, and here the limit is that the family income has to be less than 40,000 per annum. So again, it's focusing on enabling a certain segment of the economically constrained, and they especially encourage loans in the trade and service sector, and the cap amount for them is like 1 lakh. So we're talking about two different kinds of facilitation, and these kind of schemes always help in if people know that they can access it, there's a world of benefit that they can do. And bringing that to what some of the stuff that we have been involved in for a life, I'll give you an example of the Mandeshi Bank and Foundation that is based right here in the Satara district and the Maswar district in Maharashtra, where the Mandeshi Bank actually ensures that the government schemes and the lending is only for women. So Mandeshi Bank is a bank that is run by only women for women, and that's brilliant because women and the women entrepreneurs and the vendors are the ones who sell the vada pavs and have their little small stores and are enabled to access finance from an ecosystem, a bank that is governed by the RBI, in a very pro women environment, where everyone from the cashier to the bank manager is a woman and understands the local language and explains to the woman the pros and cons of the scheme. But this massive, brilliant initiative is also complemented by what the foundation does, which is training all these women into appreciating what good finance is, what are the pros and cons of taking compound interest versus simple interest, how should one ask for repayment schedules, when should we prepone a repayment, when should we postpone a repayment. These kind of trainings are provided to the women, and they are put together in joint liability groups, which means that I am not taking a loan alone. I will take it with 4 other or 5 other women, and we will be jointly responsible to return it. They have almost a zero rate of default, because women are so excited that they're being trusted. They pay back in time. They also grow their business in time, and they are trained in how to multiply their business. We've been associated with this project. It's brilliant. Chetna, Sinha is outstanding. And so that's what I'm saying, that you can have great schemes, but we need to ensure that people know how to use these schemes to be able to drive the benefit from them.
I would say, like, a lot of on the sort of on learning opportunities and education, giving at the grassroots level, that has a tremendous effect. You feel, right? These are small things which we forget. For example, simple interest rates. What's the difference between compounded interest rates? And that's a very, very good, very critical insight, because that small thing could change if you're, taking a loan which people
Absolutely.
don't understand. Right. You talked a lot about, we discussed a bit about Udyam Street. Now, as a philosophy, the development sector usually works in, in collaboration model. And therein, Edelgave is working on excellent collaborations with a lot of actors within the system. What you're doing is correcting a market failure within the system. Market failure is when, the private actors cannot solve a lot of solutions, which is usually the governments come in, but here you have a collaborative model wherein you're coming and solving a lot of problems. Now, do articulate, and there'll be a small module also on market failure, which I have to also cover that up. Now, do articulate how through Udyam Street you plan to collaborate with other foundations. Example, Milan you have, or for a better tomorrow. I mean, you're taking a lot of initiatives, and which is, I think, excellent, and you can discuss here.
Yeah. Yes, very happily. So Udyam Street, like I said, one is it started as a space where we brought the spotlight into the issue, that we have to enable that gap for women to cross, because an inability of a woman to stand on her own feet, earn her own income, or live life the way she wants is not simply because of her zest or her desire to lead a better life. It's got a lot to do with the power structures around her and the social norms that are around her. So Udyam Street's basic agenda is that. But when you spoke of the collaborative model, I'd like to also reemphasize here that we come from a premise that we know some things really well, and then there are other people who know their jobs very well. And so can we come together and form a force for good that in collective strength becomes much more powerful than we do. And that's why we collaborate. With the Udyam Street, we began with bringing the voice on the table, putting the right data points on the table and saying, okay, now what? And we are right now in conversations with different industry leaders, with experts from the social sector to say, all right, we need to make a systemic shift within our offices first, or within our small ecosystems first, to even be able to go at a national level and say, okay, we need 1 or 2, 3 things change. Because the government has been changing schemes and has been making pro women schemes, but agar uska fayda, if you're not going to take the benefit of it, then no amount of scheme is going to do its job. So with organizations such as Milan, with organizations such as, in fact, GVCS that works out of Rajasthan with female artisans, or the many, we work with 43 NGOs. The whole purpose is to say, all right, what we're talking about in terms of spotlighting, how do we integrate it with the on ground facilitation? It's not a neat and clean process because, like I told you, it's diverse in different areas. Some where the women are already earning and they need a good market, they need facilitation of good mentorship, and somewhere like in Milan, we're talking about adolescent girls who need to be shown that there is a better possibility of life if she takes one or two steps. So it is broad idea Udyams 3, but we are currently dedicated to seeing how do we ensure that we plug it in the grassroots in the way the communities want it, and not as a one size fit all model for all the work that is happening everywhere in the country. I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking at entrepreneurship to succeed, I think one of the things which I wanted to come back is equitable education. Now, you talked about a lot of government schemes. One excellent scheme which I feel is Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, which is actually you teach your daughter, and that I think is one of the best empowerments. Now, when you're going forward, do you think you would also collaborate on initiatives? And I'm sure you've already done, but on making sure that women who are going through entrepreneurship model, and you want to micro funding, which is an excellent way of putting up giving women power, at least at the grassroots level. 70% of the population in India is rural, and I think that's one of the excellent initiatives would work. Focus should we have now? It's time we get, it's all in the book, but get all more schools going in. Let also private players coming in through foundation route or whichever way. You think that is something which you think would help?
Yeah, so at this point, I keep saying this in a lot of places, that philanthropy is almost like your risk capital, or it's the place where pilots can happen when we can demonstrate that this is going to work or not. But philanthropy is not a magic wand that will solve for this. What will solve for this is the normal or the mainstreaming of these issues, right? For example, many years ago, there was this mandate that came in that every corporate board must have a female board member, one female board member. And while in the beginning there was a lot of hue and cry, and there was a lot of token partnership and all that, the benefits of having a woman on a corporate board or any board are immense, because she brings a very different way of looking at the same problems. And when men and women work together, some excellent solutions can come out. And that got demonstrated. So today, nobody has to really go and harp about, minimum number of women on boards. Oh my God, what will we do? Aisa nahi hota hai, because the demonstration of that has happened. So it may still be a lower number than the men, but the value of it has been demonstrated. The value of this has been embraced, and it has been mainstreamed. Not 100%, but at least it's not a shocker, or it's not a conversation people shy of. I think in terms of women empowerment or women's space in corporate sector or in entrepreneurship, we have to all look for mainstreaming it. It cannot become a side conversation. Udyams 3 will work to enable that to mainstream conversations, but also it cannot be it cannot be a scheme, or it cannot be a campaign like this for long. People pick it up. We would love people to pick it up, and our dedication is that corporates ho ya governments ho, they join it and make it a much bigger thing. And Edelgi will be dedicated to make sure that we are pushing in that direction. Like, for example, we also, when we run the Udyams 3 campaign, we used Bollywood as a very, attractive hook by which people will look at the message and understand and identify with what is happening. So there was a segment that we did where we took the images of the movie Paglet, and we identified about the reason why women, when we had a nice smart headline about women and what happens when they are empowered economically, and it was picked up and promoted by Ekta Kapoor and Umesh Bisht, who's the director of Paglet, and that has to happen. See, that is a small example. We can put the seed out there, but we will need many people to embrace it at their mainstream conversation. The Paglet promoters didn't do it because it would make them look good, or they did it because it made sense. Writing a pro woman story, you're putting it out there, and there is a real benefit of integrating these things. So we have to bring out the reason why this is beneficial for all. And and then mainstreaming has to happen. I keep saying it, women issues cannot be philanthropy based issues. We can work for their rights, but women have to be mainstreamed in this conversation. So I remember that line in Paglet which said, "Agar hum apna faisla khud nahi lenge, to dusra koi le lega." And we use that as a catch line to push the whole Udyam Stree message forward. And the film industry ka ek important player picked it up. That's what we are hoping to get from the rest of the ecosystem also.
Media is a major play. So if you want to make anything mainstream, media has to be there. And movies, of course, Bollywood, whatever, documentaries, so many documents. So that's a right idea. You want to have a activist role. People have to, for example, citizens now have to come out. They have to be very proactive. They just, we had systemic failures from the government. That's what I think. I mean, I think it's time we have to come out with a solution that, okay, we as other actors are going to come together and use whatever means to make them also sort of work but a lot harder. And we also take, some of the initiatives in which we can just that's my personal view. And media is, I think, one of the best ways to go forward. Now, when we talk about
Absolutely.
We talked about quite a few things here, and we talked about, and it's very good you talked about philanthropy. I just wanted a very sort of a bit of a quick, your views. Now, pay what it takes, philanthropy. That's what, I interviewed Anu Prasad, and that's one of the foundations which Edelgave is very active. That's a very global phenomena. Of course, it came out with the Britspan group, and you have various foundations like A.D. Chandra Foundation also. I think even Dell Foundation is, coming up in this. So you rightly mentioned, fair enough, philanthropy cannot be one of the ways. But if you look at the philanthropic mindset in India, that at least or globally is changing, right? And non-profits or even social entrepreneurship, which is coming out, which I think is really good way, they could have some effect going in to correct these market failures. There are ways which people are finding innovation to come in and do some work. You think that philanthropic outlook has also changed in India? It's more impact-based, it's more accountability-based, it's more based in impact for value-based.
I think we are somewhere in the middle, to tell you the truth. Again, last decade has been very interesting. I anticipate the next decade to be very interesting. With the advent of the Companies Act made philanthropy compulsory for corporates, right? 2% became 2%. the recommended, and then it became the mandate. So what happened very interestingly is that first time ever philanthropy became a boardroom conversation. Otherwise, there was always a segregation that it was a good to have, something to do when we all, have rested, or when we all have crossed a certain age barrier, or if the company has crossed a certain profit. So giving back to the community in which they have earned their profit from. So from an altruistic, to a mandate, it did push the sector, the corporate sector, to think beyond their the altruistic behavior, to think of compliance and to think of their responsibility to those they earn profit from. So that was a massive push. And the first 4-5 years after that, it was really led by the requirement to comply. And also, corporate sector is a very smart sector. It took them 5-6 years, or it took us 5-6 years to also get an understanding of the lay of the land and what kind of solutions are happening everywhere. And in that space, the way funding was happening to the grassroots also changed. Like any good project, it also came with strong cost-based analysis, strong numbers on impact, good M&E. All of that was a conversation that again became mainstream. Usme jo pay what it takes, if I bring in the example, it's a great initiative that basically says that we are not paying what it takes because we want bang for the buck. We want best price for impacting a life, which is a very apt way in which how you make soaps, or how you make cars, or how we do commerce, but probably not the best way to look at social impact from that lens only. Some things are going to cost. We are working with human beings. So pay what it takes brings the focus on the fact that we are not paying what it takes. So we may have funded great projects, but we are starving the NGOs financially of the capital that they need to get. And it brought, again, very interesting data points at the center to place it in the middle and invoke from the funders a response that, we need to improve on some cost matrix that we are setting for the philanthropy sector. And that's what really this is about. That's that we've taken a lot of those learnings and also imbibed in the latest work that we're doing, which is the Grow Fund, which is again looking to fund 100 NGOs in the sector for their core costs. Because in the pandemic, we've all been funding ration kits, oxygen concentrators, but we've not funded even the auto rickshaw, fare for the person who's them. And that has been incredibly stressful for the sector. And we are hoping to address it head on and say, this is not, we can't be pinching pockets like this for very critical costs. It comes as a deal, and we have to be very, 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 very thoughtful when we are doing this.
I'll have an open-ended question. You could speak about any other projects apart from Udyam Street, and I'll just add something else also. So you could speak anything about what any other project apart from Udyam Street which you're doing at Edelgate Foundation. And second, what are you very passionate about? Maybe something which is not being done through any of the foundations. And how would you like, what you're very passionate about to see a change in India? And what you think could be the ways to change that? So there are sort of three sub questions in.
Okay, so I'll actually lead from one to another. Bear with me a little bit. And a lot of what I've said is actually saying parts of what I believe in. But there were two, very, very impactful events in my life about a couple of years ago. One was when I had made that visit to MWARD and seen that, how Devnar works and the dumping ground and the entire landscape of homes that are there right to the point the dumping ground begins. And the monsoon, it was raining, it was filthy, and we were making a field visit, my colleague and I, and we went right down to the last hut there, and we looked, and immediately it was like a mountain had begun of debris. And there I saw 3 little children playing very, very happily on the mountain of filth. And on my left, I saw 3-4 women laughing, talking to each other. And it is very surreal, the fact that something like this is allowed to exist, that we wouldn't even stand next to a stinking bag of filth that is outside our apartments. But here there were people who were not just living, but who had their and hygiene to chori do. They were reconciled, and they were living their life, and that had shaped a lot. Cut to the second, time when we have a NGO called Jan Sahas that works with survivors of rape and sexual violence. And they had organized something called the Dignity March, and they were marching across, they had marched thousands of kilometers of travel across the country, with who? They walked with survivors of violence and rape. There were thousands. When I went to, in Sion, they had organized a mandap, and we went there, and there were at least 2,000-3,000 people, women and men, who had survived rape and violence, and who were standing there. And basically that whole 1-hour event was about saying, we were raped, but the shame is not ours. And again, they were laughing, they were talking. There was an incredible amount of energy. And I cannot get these 2 episodes out of my mind. And I think a lot of the work that Edelgive does is a response to things like these. Why am I saying that? Because it shows that when life is going on, whether we work or not, people are surviving, people are living wherever they are, and their lives will get harder or easier, but they will continue to live. So what are we doing in this whole social change to enable them in the way they need, not in the way we think they should change? So those 2 episodes taught me the value of understanding the issue from the perspective of those who suffer and not those who hold checkbooks. And I think there is something that is a deeply passionate issue for me. And I hope that Edelgive in all its work continues to imbibe that quality. We continue to think that whatever we design, whether it's our Udyams 3 or whether it's our education collaborative or whether it's the Grow Fund now, the lens that we apply is from the lens of those for whom we are doing this work and what would provide relief to them, not what would give us another medal of, ek aur kaam humne kar liya. So I think, I hope I've answered your questions. I can't remember the third one, but I think this is what I'm very, very passionate about, putting the lens, the spotlight on those who are suffering. And secondly, build solutions, putting them in the center of it and not our desire to do whatever we want. And with that, we want to move forward. There's a lot that's going to happen in the coming few years with the sector and with Edelweiss. And we hope that we make lesser mistakes and we make better decisions to reduce the hurt that is around in this country as well as in this world overall.
Thank you. That's a very poignant, you had a very poignant conversation. And I think one of the ways which you can change, we specifically talked about rapes and sexual misconduct, a very severe kind of sexual misconduct, would have to be something on two pillars. One, there has to be at a universal level, which is, you have the United Nations system, but at top and central government level, very serious, policies coming in. For example, rapes are one of the most underreported cases, I think, in India. We don't know even what could be the actual numbers. So that's the FIR which you talked about. That is where the problem comes in, and you try to blame on the woman. That is precisely which you were in between talked about, and that has to go. And that is, of course, where the society comes in. And I feel that the new India, the cosmopolitan places are right happening there around the world. They are ready to fight for the solutions. And I think this is a slow drawn process. But this is one policy change. If you want to see a change, I think it's multiple actors have to come in. I mean, right from the
Absolutely.
top, from the global level, from the country level, and then the civic societies, different pillars in civic societies. Another question, and this before we go to the last one, I wanted to, you are a leader, you are in one of the best foundations in India, which is from India. You have
Yes.
Gates Foundation, you have Dell Foundation, fantastic. Ford Foundation doing great work. But like A.D. Chandra Foundation is doing, it will give right comes on the Premier Foundation. You are a market leader. You have come out with the best practices. Now, those practices are also in financial innovation. If you want to talk about, you could talk about anything like, for example, how blended finance, if you have used any instrument, or how that could be a lever. One, they could be simple instruments like first loss of capital, which in India has already come. But there could be other multiple plays,
Yes.
come. And you could, if you want to speak a bit about that, that'll be good.
Yes, surely. So yes, blended finance is a very interesting mechanism to look at a complex set of problems with innovative financing, right? I mean, finally, grants across the world have done their bit. I don't think grants will ever get redundant. We will give donations, and they are a very important mechanism. So I don't see donations as becoming redundant. So this is not about this versus that. But the fact is that since 2000, I think it was in the mid, first decade of the 2000, about 2005, yeah, 7 May, when blended finance started to become very, very important. And I think it's also mobilized more than 100 billion, if I'm not mistaken, about $130 billion since then, where banks, DFIs have come in to guarantee structures for infrastructure, for climate projects, for women development. India saw its own dip with the Educate Girls model that came about some years ago, which was an very high impact development impact bonds. Now there are all of this. There are social entrepreneurs and there are grant makers. So my perspective on blended finance is very simple. We are living in complex times with complex problems, and so one kind of finance should not work also. How is one better than the other? Honestly, I reserve my judgment on that because it's very early days. See, India mein to particularly we've seen Educate Girls with that dip, but there is not much. You can say that there are other little, small models coming up, but there's not much that has happened. It will be gradual. It will need policy support also. Currently, philanthropy has policy support, and it makes it tax viable. It makes it regulatory viable, but the rest of it has to happen. So it's coming in a little slower. There have been a lot of comments against it, that it will skew the sector, or it will take the humanity out of the humanitarian sector. हाँ, मतलब ऐसे बहुत है ना कि अरे हम outcome, like for example, it's also not so easy. Educate girls, it is about education, so outcome is in that sense simpler. That okay, we check the marks, we assess, we check marks, we see how results are faring, but that's also one dimensional. The fact is, education is not simply about the marks. But
True,
there
true.
is a lot that comes
I agree.
justice to
I
it.
mean,
We can say that education, it may not be up to the mark in terms of how we measure impact, but in cases like infrastructure, health, education, it's doable. You know, in case of women empowerment, for example, it's much more complex. But I wouldn't throw the baby and the bathwater out together. I would say that there we need to experiment more and leverage the benefits of multiple kinds of financing and capital, is my personal take on it. India has a lot of maturity to go through before we get comfortable with these alternative models. That's why you see just one big dip that did fairly well actually, but we've not seen an equivalent of that follow up yet. But I'm quite positive that we will experiment as we go on.
we come to the last question, and it's always the aha question. We discussed a lot. We discussed your Udyam Street initiative. You had a landmark launch of a report. You talked of a lot of initiatives. You talked what you are also passionate about, and we saw how much India could improve. And all as a matter of fact, globally, I would say that women empowerment is a global issue. If you look at it, you are very stunned that a lot of countries which are very advanced economies are still lacking on a lot of parameters. Like if you read the report, apart from the Nordic countries, Switzerland, fantastic, a lot of things, but a lot of countries you expect to be right up there, but they're also improving. But what good thing has happened, I think, in the last decade, more so in the last 5 years, is that there has been a revolution, at least I would say. I would use the word revolution because it's a bit radical. It's not iterative. That there's been an awakening, and people are ready to now go into that segment and say, no, we want to change, and that change is coming in through sustainable development goals. You have a lot of financial instruments also coming in. Different. It could be climate finance. It's going to social finance now, to social bonds and now. When we come to the last question, do talk about the aha moment. Smile to your.
No, so when things work out, it's always brilliant. That always makes me smile. In concept, everything looks good, but trying, testing, going through doubting Thomases and then proving it is always very, very rewarding. But my aha moment was actually non-sector. When in early days when Edelgive was very small, and when all these, because I was a crossover, I'd come from as an outsider, and I would see so many things like I said, common sense. And and I remember the first time I had put out a very, what I thought was an atrocious suggestion, ki, why don't we do this another way? And the person who was listening to me said yes. And that was for me a shocker, because I had thought I was just, just checking. And he gave me a yes. And over that year, I think I had made these very strange requests from people who didn't have to listen, but who just said yes. And for me, the aha moment was really that a lot of times we just don't ask because we think we're being stupid, or because we think the idea is not good enough, or we cancel our own ideas, our own efforts before we even give them to test by somebody else. So me, the aha moment was that, all we have to do sometimes is ask. And the worst that will happen is that someone will say no. But the best that will happen is, something which was a small foundation 7 years ago becomes an Edelgive now. And yeah, that was aha, and that's been a hugely satisfying last decade.
Question, as a social leader, would you like to give a message to everybody out there? Any message you want to share?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think I've said it earlier, but if this message needs to be highlighted again, we have social leaders have incredible responsibility to do what we do. We also have the responsibility of unintended consequences, where we put our money, what solutions we fund, who we support, has deep implications on people who are already suffering. So we have to make conscious choices and factor in for the mistakes that we made, and not be embarrassed by those ideas that did not work out. I think unintended consequences have to be factored in, and designing for the people who matter, not for our goals, our personal goals. is a philosophy that I have very deeply internalized, and that would be my message for everyone, that we owe it to the people that we work for, that the right solutions are supported, and that if we make a mistake, we are able to address it and step back instead of move on with it. So we have incredible responsibility, and we should be owning it like badges of honors.
Thanks, Nagma. Thanks sharing time. You gave a very in-depth perspective. I really appreciate you for giving time and
Thank
sharing
you.
your thoughts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.